Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their timeless and extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are over 180 interviews in this podcast series, all of which you can enjoy on aarecoveryinterviews.com and all podcast apps. My guest today is Dan C., with whom I will delve into a story that challenges conventional wisdom about alcoholism and recovery. We often think of addiction as a young person's struggle, a disease that wrecks lives early and publicly. But what happens when a cunning, baffling, and powerful disease lies dormant for decades, only to combust when a seemingly successful life hits an unexpected turn? This is the powerful and eye-opening story of my guest, Dan C. Dan lived what many would call a remarkable life. A highly respected criminal justice attorney, he built a prominent career, earned accolades, and navigated the world with confidence and control, or so it appeared. Alcohol was always present, but never in his mind the problem. Like so many of us, Dan believed that he still had power over his drinking. He managed it, justified it, and folded it neatly into his version of a successful life. And for decades, that illusion held. Then in his mid-60s, the illusion shattered. A convergence of pressures and losses created a storm he could no longer manage. The disease he had outmaneuvered, or thought he had, finally took center stage. What followed was a rapid descent into chaos, fear, and hopelessness, until Dan was brought, reluctantly but mercifully, into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dan recognized the difference between his lifelong reliance on self and the simple spiritual principles of AA's program of recovery. Instead of turning away in pride, he leaned into it fully, got a sponsor, began working the steps, and immersed himself in the fellowship. What began as a willingness grew into joy. Today, those connections remain a cornerstone of his 3 years of continuous sobriety. Some members of AA who got sober young may marvel at how Dan avoided obvious consequences. But his story is a powerful reminder that alcoholism is patient, progressive, and no respecter of age, intellect, or success. It is the great equalizer. Dan's story and those shared on AA Recovery Interviews are more than personal reflections. They are lifelines. They carry a simple but vital message. Recovery is possible at any stage of life and at any stage of the disease. I invite you to listen, learn, and be inspired by this extraordinary story of recovery and redemption with my friend and AA brother, Dan C.
My name's Dan, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Dan, and that's what everybody else in the room says. AA is a very friendly place, and it's one of the few places where you can introduce yourself and people understand what you're trying to do and what you're trying to say. So I do want to express my appreciation for your being here and helping spread the word about recovery in a way that's worked for you, it's worked for me, it's worked for millions of people around the world, but yet it still astounds me how many people have not engaged in it or even know anything about it. But now, what is your sobriety date?
Yeah, April 13th, 2022.
So what was going on in the preceding days?
Yeah, it's kind of it's not a linear answer, but let me answer it this way. So I had been drinking too much, at least for the previous 4 or 5 years before I finally went to my first AA meeting. Mm-hmm. I tried to quit, and I'd quit for a weekend, insubstantial, and this won't resonate with many folks, but there's a sport called Supercross. It's Supercross motocross. It's a thing for the kids where these guys pilot these motorcycles doing incredible physical acts. And I've been a Supercross motocross fan forever. And there was a young man named Ryan Dungey, who was a 4 or 5-time national Supercross motocross champion, and he had retired, but he was sitting in our suite. I generally get a suite at NRG, and I'd known Ryan, but I'd never spent any time around him. And I looked into this kid's eyes, Howard, and he's probably 30, 31, and he had the whitest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, just like you know, and I thought to myself, has this son of a bitch even ever had a Twinkie? I mean, I looked into his eyes, and I mean this in a heterosexual way. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, I've never seen eyes that white.
Wow.
So this was on a Saturday night, and it was probably the following Wednesday or
Yeah.
Thursday. I went to my usual bar and had my same old, 5 or 6 double Tito's and Red Bulls, which I always had,
Mm-hmm.
which is just a terrible drink.
Yeah.
As they say, if alcohol's a crutch, vodka's a wheelchair. And and I went home and I didn't think much about it. And I got up the next morning and I looked into the mirror and I honestly did not recognize this fat human that was staring at me from the mirror. It took me a second because I'd ballooned up to like 300 pounds. And I looked into this fat man's white eyes and I thought to myself, Ryan Dungey's eyes have never looked like this ever. I gotta quit. This is ridiculous.
Were they all
Yeah,
bloodshot
sure.
and red veins?
Yeah, just horrible. So it turns out that the fellow that I had my last drink with is the brother of Chris F., who's in the program, and
Right.
Chris and I had known each other for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
So I went from one F to the other F, and I said, "Man, I need your help. I got to stop." And he said, "Well, come to Post Oak Club on Saturday," and I did. So and there wasn't, Howard. I'd been in trouble with the wife for drinking, but there was never any "I'm going to leave you," or there was never any arrest, or there was never anything really traumatic. It was long past time.
Yeah, and we'll get around to that. In fact, what I suggest to my the people who I interview for the podcast, and that was a brilliant answer to my first question of where you were. But I like to encourage them to a few quick things. One of which is you don't need to answer every question with the entire story because we're going to get to it. The next thing is because of trying to keep the show itself completely anonymous, people who know your voice or who may be able to fit together who you are will know who you are. But those are the people that it doesn't make any difference that they know that, because they're either people who are sitting in meetings with you or people who know that you're in the program. The rest of the people, they're going to hear it with Dan C., and that's the extent of identifiable traits. And then the next thing is that anything that you say with regard to a location like a clubhouse, a rehab center, or any other commercial venture, I also will edit out. And I do this just in the editing process. So I do that so people, if for one reason or another they're in trouble and somebody is trying to find them, I'd hate for them to be identified by the club they go to or the church basement that they're in. So that I digress there, but it sounds to me like this turning point materialized rather quickly for you. How did that happen so quickly, do you think?
I think it had been bubbling beneath the surface for a long time, and it was the combination of I mean, frankly, how with my vanity, it was also part of the tipping point was just how heavy I'd gotten. And COVID hit me like it hit a lot of people, but it really got on top of me. And I'd been trying to quit for at least 2 or 3 years, and I just finally hit overload.
What kind of things were you doing to try and quit?
Just the usual self-help stuff. I'll only have 2 drinks. I'll only drink on Friday, or I'll only drink on Friday or Saturday. I won't drink at lunch or whatever. And none of that with me worked. It would work for a night, and that was about it.
Did you find that you were able to still function while you were drinking during the day and in the everyday work?
Yeah, for sure. And I wasn't a big day drinker. That is during the day, but I drank 4, 5, 6 days a week. But I was what I would call a highly functioning alcoholic. And in my business, we're surrounded by drinkers. So I didn't think really until those past preceding couple of years, Howard, that I really had a drinking problem. Whether I did or I didn't, I don't know. It was time.
And it compounds the problem too, doesn't it? Because you're a functional alcoholic, there's lots of things that convince you on a daily basis that you're not an alcoholic, because a real alcoholic would not be able to function in the things that you're functioning so well at. So
Right.
it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? That I can get along. I can do my job. What's the big
I'm
deal?
okay. I'm okay.
Is it all right if I mention that you're in the legal profession?
Sure, of course. I'm pretty public about my recovery, so I'm not concerned about
Well,
that.
that's fine too. The reason I ask that is, out of nearly 200 people I've interviewed, there seems to be an inordinate number of people from the legal profession. Why does it seem like the legal profession sticks out when it comes to problems with alcohol and alcoholism?
I think it's a That's a good question. I think it's a combination of a number of things. First, it's just systemic in the legal profession. I mean,
Hmm.
prosecutors drink, judges drink, defense lawyers drink, civil lawyers, criminal lawyers, family law lawyers. It's just part of the culture. And in addition to that, if I'm any good at what I do, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of my mentor, and I'm 68, so the generation ahead of me, we're talking about World War II guys,
Yeah.
and certainly alcohol was very prevalent among that community. And if your mentor drinks, you're going to drink. And if you want to hang out with the boss after 5 o'clock, there's going to be alcohol involved. And if you would have said, no, I don't drink, or I'm just going to have one, and your mentor said, well, whatever, that would have been a party foul, right? You would have been looked
Hmm.
upon as weak or not part of the club. And because the stresses, particularly in trial work, which is what I do, the stresses are immense.
Hmm.
And I use that as a justification for self-medicating. Well, I just tried a case, and my client got convicted, and he's going to do 30 years. Well, I'd self-medicate. If we avoided conviction, well, that's a celebration. So whether a funeral or a birth, one way or the other, there was either a cause for celebration or a cause for remorse. And there's so few lawyers that I know, if they're not in the program, they're pretty much drinking. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I get that. In fact, I've had more than a few attorneys tell me that in their particular type of job, you can't win for losing, in that there's always going to be somebody who is mad at you or upset.
Sure.
No matter how you do things, it's a great time to take a drink. It just balances everything out.
I think that's aptly put.
Do you know any attorneys that you knew were in AA, and what did you know about AA from them?
The only lawyer that I was close to that I knew was in the program was Chris. I have met or renewed my relationship with a handful of others since I've been in, but he's the only guy kind of my generation that I knew was in AA. And I didn't really have, Howard, any real sort of beliefs, good or bad, impressions, good or bad, about AA. I'd never been to an AA meeting. I didn't know anybody that went to AA meetings. I'd heard of the success of AA, and I'd had clients that that would have to go, or clients that go into rehab, but I didn't really have any firm either impressions, expectations, or understandings of what AA was all about. It was a new culture to me.
Yeah, that's a great example of selective listening too. Hearing what you want to hear about recovery. It amazes me in popular culture these days and the media that more people don't know about it. Sometimes I think we do such a great job keeping things anonymous that people who need to find out about it may not find out, which is why I do these interviews, so that it's a little bit, I don't know, friendlier or easier or softer way for people to understand what AA is about through the words and thoughts of the guests of the show.
And this may be jumping ahead, but there's no possible way I would be sober but for AA. No possible way. I mean, like less than 1%.
Yeah.
And because the program is so good on so many levels and so positive and informational on so many levels, hell, I think the whole world should go to AA. I mean, it teaches you how to be a better person. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't go there to become I didn't know, I thought I went there to become, a better alcoholic or a recovered drinker. You're a better person if you, for sure, if you follow the steps.
Really, what you're talking about in following the steps is the principles behind the steps, because the steps are rather specific to AA, but the principles behind them of honesty and integrity and all these other things, that's what we're really striving for. We strive for spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, but yet the goal, if you really do get to it, which nobody ever does, is perfect.
Sure.
So 3 years, a lot of the attorneys I've talked to have been sober, ranging from 2 to 3 to 5, up to 60 years. Interviewed some barristers in London and some other people around the world. And it's uncanny to me that the similarities between people in the profession are so frequent and so stark. I wondered if you'd comment on what kind of obstacles the profession kind of puts on itself that keeps people out there and away from recovery.
I think it's an old boys club, right? Whether you're a male or a female, it's a really clubbish, particularly the trial work. And again, I don't pretend to speak for all kinds of lawyers, but I think I can speak for at least my experience as a criminal defense lawyer. It's an old school, old boys club, and it's expected of you. And if you indicated a dislike or an inability to drink, that's seen as weakness.
Mm-hmm.
It's akin as más macho sort of society, again, where if you even act like you need help or you're struggling, the attitude is, you're weak. You put your big boy pants on and get over it. Go take care of your clients. Quit worrying about yourself.
I've been involved over the years from time to time in some of the legal profession's attempts at putting together some treatment protocols for attorneys and judges and others, much like the Airline Pilots Association has their own specific programs, and the doctors and dentists and other people in the medical profession have their own subset. I've heard of people within the legal profession trying to duplicate that same effort, but they've never quite gotten the traction or the purchase that the other professions have gotten. Do you sense a lot of resistance to it from the people who know they need it and are going after it?
Absolutely. And there's also, let's not forget, just sort of the malpractice angle of it, where if you admit that you had an alcohol problem, well, sooner or later, some client from 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 20 years ago, statute of limitations or otherwise, they're going to say, oh, well, he was impaired when he represented me, and that's the reason I got convicted, or that's the reason he didn't do this and he didn't do that. And I know some of that may come with me being a little out, if you will, about the recovery. But, to me, that's a small price to pay. If I can help spread the word among lawyers how beneficial AA has been to me, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, it's been life-changing for me. I'll do it every time.
Yeah, and it's both noble and vital is what I'd say about it. And, you're to be commended for taking that message out there. And I know that there's a lot of collective wisdom amongst the men that he associates with, as well as you now. That I know. But every now and then I'll say something like that, and the guy says, "No, I haven't had a. In fact, I'm looking for one." And so, and I don't edit that out, because I think sometimes you have to just let people know that you're trying to be genuine. So you're 68 years old. You've been sober 3 years, so you got sober at, 65?
65.
After what? I mean, when did you start drinking? 14, 15, or was it earlier than that?
No, it's probably 15, 16. I was I was a late bloomer. In some of these meetings, you learn just how early some people start. I mean, like third, fourth grade. It's unbelievable how accessible alcohol is and how early some people start.
Was there alcoholism within your family of origin?
The straight answer to that is I think so. And it's funny because I never recalled seeing either parent intoxicated. I did learn many years later, and I was working with a lawyer and an assistant United States attorney who knew my dad. And my dad always told us that he quit drinking when my brother, who's older than me, was born, which was kind of ironic because I'd see my dad with the only thing I ever saw him drink alcohol wise, beer or Drambuie. But he would sit there with a beer in his hand and say, "Yeah, I quit drinking when you boys were born." And I kind of looked like, well, not really. But my dad was not the sort of man you challenge. But the windy explanation continuing, this AUSA who I met probably in my late 30s said, "I knew your dad." I said, "Well, my dad was an interesting man. My dad was a World War II, great generation, wouldn't say shit if he had a mouthful of it kind of guy, just this silent, strong type." And he said, "Your dad had 4 martinis for lunch every day." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No, he was famous." My dad worked for Texaco. He was famous within Texaco. Your dad had 4 martinis every day at lunch. And I'm like, that's hard for me to believe. But I've talked to a couple of other people that anecdotally supported the idea, at least, that dad drank every day at lunch. But, I was at work or at college or at school or whatever. I didn't know what he did at lunch. If he was really drinking 4 martinis a day, my dad was I don't know that the word closet alcoholic is apt, but he drank more than he let on.
There must have been a lot of stuff that didn't make any sense to you because of that. Can you think of some examples of that?
I don't really, retrospectively, Howard, I don't really link it back to alcohol so much as it was a generational, again, the great generation folks, the World War II people. Look, my dad went through the Great Depression, the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, and World War II. Those were 3 things I never had to worry about as a kid. My dad, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation, he was just completely unskilled at communicating about his emotions. I think he told me he loved me 3 or 4 times in his life, which is not a knock on him at all. I knew my dad loved me. He just didn't emote. He was just this strong, silent type that didn't joke, didn't cry, didn't get excited, didn't get, he was just kind of this oak tree of a personality. And the disconnect or the questions I had were I'm not so sure they were born out of his alcohol use, but just he was such a stoic personality type that he was very hard to get close to and very hard to love and be loved. I'm not whining about that. That was just his generation. He didn't have the skill set to sit down and have an honest conversation about substantive issues. That's just not how he was wired to survive, provide, and shut up. Right? That's who my dad was.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And my dad was from the exact same generation and fought in the war. Came back with a diagnosis of shell shock, which was PTSD at the time. Was extremely sick, emotionally and mentally ill. The experience was so horrendous that rage and anger were the ways that he chose to express them. He never really drank, but what's interesting about it, Dan, is that over the years that I've been looking at my relationship with my father and looking back, there have been an awful lot of puzzle pieces that have kind of fallen into place. And as sick a man as he was, my dad had done these things or been this way to me. And I think it was my sponsor who heard me talking about it or saw some of the things I was writing and said, "You don't have to defend your father. He did what he did, and you were there." And there's a tendency, and in my case, I went full force in saying, there's no way in the world that my dad could have done anything about it. And my sponsor would say, that's not what this is about. He was talking specifically about the 4th and 5th step. I ended up taking that kind of attitude. And what was ironic about it, Dan, was in the end, I found a new kind of compassion for the man. Because at last I understood without having to defend him, without having to do anything except try to understand what the poor man went through. Your dad, my dad, carried the hate and anger and everything else of the war home with them, and everybody in my family suffered from that. It was there, and I worked through it, but it took a while. Whenever I hear anybody talking about parents of my dad and mom's generations, I kind of connect immediately and know just how difficult it is to be able to reconcile what they did.
I got to add a couple things. One of which you may relate to, which is the song that best defined my relationship with my dad is Harry Chafin's "Cats in the Cradle." I mean, that is my relationship with my dad. You know, it's just right between the eyes. So when my dad, yeah, yeah. So my dad passed away. He was 89, and we get the call from the care facility that he's passed away. So okay, we drive out there, and it was a blessing. At that age and that state of his body, it was wasn't a cause for celebration, but it was like okay, he's going to be in a better place. So
Yeah.
get in the
Course.
truck, and of course, Cats in the Cradle comes on, right? So I'm crying like a newborn. Just unbelievably. I still get wispy about it. So we go out there and didn't have the chance to say goodbye. So I'm doing the woulda, shoulda, coulda that any child does after their parents pass. Sorry. And then I get a call from a client whose son had just killed his mother. Okay, so it was a lawyer in town. His son had experienced a severe bout of schizophrenia, and the psychiatrist had said it's okay, you can leave and go home. And this boy who was at UT, he was a 21-year-old kid, goes home and kills his mother. Right, slits her ear to ear, and I mean, it was just like this shot from above. My dad saying, "Shut up. You're not having a bad day. That guy's having a bad day. So go take care of him and his kid." So that's what I did. It was a spiritual moment of the most emotional kind.
It's amazing, and those tears are revelatory as far as I'm concerned, Dan. And I have an awful hard time shedding tears myself, but I honor you for your willingness to share that with me. It means a lot. It means some trust has been built even in the brief amount of time that you and I know each other. As all this was happening in the house and so forth, what was your mother's involvement or response?
My mom was who was the actress on the Dick Van Dyke Show? My mom was Laura Petrie. I mean, the whole time. Perfect hair, perfect dress, never a crumb in the sink. The dinner was on the table at 6 o'clock when the old man got home. Cheery, supportive. She had a wicked sense of humor. But she and my dad were complete polar opposites. I mean, my dad, you couldn't get my dad to talk, and you couldn't be in a bad mood around my mom. So my dad was very lucky to have our mom in his life, for sure.
Isn't that something? Did you ever sense that friction was starting to break through the relationships' outer core or facade?
Yeah, but again, this is 45, 50 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And husbands and wives, they just didn't argue outside the bedroom, right? You didn't. It was a much more. It was a softer environment, or a much more closed environment. I do have to add another funny story about my mom. My mom was, or a funny story, not necessarily AA related, but it just shows you the passive aggressive nature of some of those relationships. So my mom was never a material woman, and we grew up on the west side. I went to high school back in the day. Whatever, my dad worked for Texaco, blah blah blah, and we like to call ourselves upper middle class, whatever that was, right? We weren't middle class; we were upper middle class. Okay, and my mom was not material, but the only thing, Howard, she ever wanted in life that she explained to us was a Mercedes. Okay, and my dad bought a Mercedes on my mom's birthday, but my dad, being my dad, he bought it for him, not not for my mom. And my mom was so pissed about it. We had the ubiquitous family plot with 4 plots for me, my mom, my brother. But what she didn't tell us was she got so pissed at the Mercedes buy that she went out and bought a plot near Waxahachie outside for herself. And Howard, we didn't find out about that until we at her funeral. And the guy that she used to work for came in and said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be burying her. What are you talking about?" "Oh, she got so mad at your dad. It's your job." I called the cemetery, and oh yes, she bought a plot here about 20 years ago. So we had to stop the funeral and push it back a week to bury her where she wanted to be buried. Now, at the end of the day, who knows if she, 10 years, 15 years later after Mercedes, where she wanted to be buried, but we did the best to honor her wishes. And so Dad's out there alone. Bless your heart, Dad. Mom's not coming anytime soon.
That's a great story. And it just goes to show how hurt people can get from the type of behavior that is bestowed upon them by a spouse. What's interesting is my mother and dad's story is very much the same. When it came time to bury my mother, my dad preceded her in death. We expected, because they did the same thing. They bought a plot out in Colorado where they were living part of the time. And she went ahead and she had the plot moved, but about 6 plots down from my dad. So even in death, he got zinged. Oh, God. We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing and meaningful way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. While you're there, enhance your program with another audiobook I produced, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the 3rd and 4th editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Listen to a free sample of Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book or in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along. You're gonna love it. And we're back. So there are a number of years here between when you first drank yourself and when you came into AA. As you think back on those years, which were the most pivotal in terms of pivoting you towards being an alcoholic versus away?
I got to say the COVID years. If you live in a leper colony, you don't understand that everybody's a leper, right? Everybody just looks normal. I'll do a poor analogy to the legal community, to a leper colony, meaning you're around a bunch of people that drank a lot. I didn't feel like I was much of an outlier. I always had a good time. I thought I was a good drunk, whatever that is. But COVID put a number on me. What I recognized during COVID was I'm losing control of this stuff. I was planning my days around my first drink and how far it was to the first bar, and it became a problem.
So we're really talking about a time that's really no more than about 6 years ago, as of, let's say, the date of this particular podcast, which incidentally, the stories like your story is really timeless. And I just love the fact that somebody could hear your story 20, 30, 50 years from now, and it would be just as relevant and just as meaningful. 6 years is not a lot of time to develop alcoholism after a lifetime of drinking. So would you say you were a normal drinker during those years?
I was normal plus, but what happened to me happened to a lot of trial lawyers, and particularly criminal lawyers, because once the pandemic hit, you had law enforcement basically taking a holiday for a couple of years, right? My business is sort of white collar defense, so these are complex investigations. Think Enron or Stanford. That's the house I live in. Those types of cases. So the FBI wasn't out interviewing anybody. And unless the FBI or law enforcement's interviewing folks, my phone's not ringing. So my intake of new business came to a grinding halt. Then the courts were shut down. I had a couple of trials during those couple of years, but not the full court press that is my daily life. So not only did I not have new business, I had no current business to take care of. I had some some stressors at the house. We adopted our grandson who was, 5 or 6 years old, and I was 64 or 5, whatever I was. So between all those stressors, it was my fault. I'm not saying it was COVID's fault or anything else, but the self-medication really took on a whole new level during that period of time.
And the stressors turn out to be not the reason you drank, but triggers for the fact that you were still an alcoholic.
Sure.
That's what I've always felt, is that we drink because we're alcoholic. We don't drink because of the things that trigger us to drink. People who are not alcoholic don't go through what we go through for that very reason. But sounds to me like all this is going on. Lots of stressors, lots of things happening. You had how many years between graduating law school and that period of time? We're talking about, 40 years or something like that?
Yeah, 38, 39. By that point, I'm a 42-year lawyer now, so I've been sober 3 years. So 38, 39 years of, highly functional consumption, if not alcoholism. And you may disagree with it, but to me, the term alcoholic is kind of an elastic phrase, right? I don't know when one becomes an alcoholic, except to the extent that you can't control it, and you recognize it. But the timeline of it is certainly linked to COVID. It's not an excuse, but that's when it got out of control.
Yeah, I get that. You had mentioned earlier about being what you would consider a highly functional alcoholic until COVID, until you hit the doors of AA. Can you recall any times along the way that you questioned your alcohol consumption, or if you didn't, other people saw it and said something to you about it? What were the signs along the way that might have indicated to you at an earlier time that you had a problem, but it just wasn't showing up?
Oh, when you got blackout drunk at a birthday party or a holiday event or something. I think I only recall one time when somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Dan, you might be an alcoholic." And that was not too long before I quit. And it was a judge who I liked. And he meant it in the most nurturing way possible. He was encouraging me to do something about it. But other than that, I remember acting a fool and upsetting wife number 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever was along the way. But I don't remember anyone suggesting to me that I had the problem.
What I found, especially amongst people who are at the apex or close to it and in their profession, and they are among the best of the best, and they tend to surround themselves with a lot of people, some of whom drink, some of whom don't. But they also, as I've had experience with people I've known, I said, why didn't someone say anything to you about it? And he said, well, first of all, they were drinking as well, and they knew to keep me drunk or to keep me happy. We hear about that a lot, like in the entertainment business or sports figures, to get sober because there's so much in the public light. It's so often that they can be coddled. I don't have a problem. Everybody says I'm in good shape. Did you ever encounter any of that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, retrospectively, most of the people that I drank with, I was either good buddies with. They were either contemporaries of mine or they worked for me, right? And you're not going to tell your boss, hey, man, it was, hey, boss, get you another double. They never even thought about, maybe the old man ought to pull it back a little bit, right? So that's for sure. I was coddled maybe a little bit too strong, but I was certainly highly enabled. If you're writing a check to somebody, they're probably not going to tell you need to stop.
That's true. You and I heard a story. I don't know if you were in the meeting or not the other week that somebody talked about his biggest client writing a check for him to go through like 4 weeks of rehab.
Yeah,
a client doing that, and
that's impressive.
When you came to those early AA meetings, what were you thinking? I mean, what were your thoughts in the early days and weeks of having to sit in those meetings?
Yeah, at the time, I wasn't big on God. I told myself I was spiritual, but I wasn't religious, and those were just words that came out of my mouth. I didn't know
Yeah.
what that meant. It just sounded good. I felt like it was almost immediately. I felt like I was in, for lack of a better description, the right fraternity. It just seemed like everybody was opening and compassionate, and like you and Boots, both of y'all came up to me at either my first or second meeting where we go on Sunday night, and I thought that was wonderful. Right? Y'all didn't know me from Adam's off ox, and you were so sincere and so decent. And I didn't attribute that to me. I didn't think, well, boy, aren't I special? I thought, well, how cool is that? That somebody that's been sober for as many years comes up to a total stranger and says, "Hey, welcome, glad you're here." And it was kind of rinse and repeat. What I did not realize at the time, and I can't stress this enough, Howard, my compulsion to drink stopped almost immediately after I went to my first AA meeting. I mean, you talk about a miracle. That's a miracle, and I didn't even
Yeah.
recognize it, right? And it wasn't, you can't, it was a one day at a time, and 30 days and 60 days and all that. I went to a few a week. I never jumped in with both feet from a 90 and 90 perspective, but my compulsion to drink ceased almost immediately after my first AA meeting, and that's truly a miracle.
That is a miracle. And I've heard of that happening with other people. I resisted it. I almost went back out, but I still only got one. I didn't have to go through a slip or any sort of relapse. Have there been times within the 3 years that you were maybe a little bit closer to the edge than you'd like to keep yourself on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. There were a handful of times. And interestingly or not, it wasn't needing the alcohol. I was a vodka drinker. I drank Red Bull and vodka, again, the worst drink on the planet for your body. And just methamphetamine and barbiturates. What could be better? It's just, what are you thinking?
Oh, God, yes.
But it wasn't desiring alcohol. At the two original Carrabba's are great favorites of mine, and they make a chocolate martini that's just wonderful tasting, right? Or espresso martini, that's what it was. And I craved the taste. So we were there one night, and I was, man, I really want an espresso martini. But it wasn't because I wanted to alter my state. It was just because of the taste. But the one thing that AA beat the shit out of you with, and it must be true because I hear it so often, that if you go out after you've been sober, it's going to be so much worse than it was before. And I've got to believe that's true. In fact, I do believe that's true because I'm scared to death of taking a drink, right? Because I'm in a position now, everything would just come unwound. And I didn't say this because it's a hard question to even articulate, but after I got sober, or after I got into AA, my wife, she had ovarian cancer before, and maybe a year, 8 months after I became sober, she had lung cancer and went through a whole nother round at MD Anderson. And I got to tell you, dude, if I had not, I was no picnic, and I still am. I'm not saying, I'm not polishing the halo here, but had I not become sober, there's no way I would have gotten through that without really making a bigger mess of it than it already was.
Did she survive? She survived that?
Yes. But I think God was looking out for me for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I don't think that was a coincidence at all. Just not really.
Such a great realization to come to, that God was watching out, had changed your behavior at maybe just the right time, too.
For sure.
And they say we don't get here too soon. Many people get here too late, but you can never be too soon for recovery in AA. The other thing I wanted to ask you was about getting a sponsor. How did you go about finding someone to sponsor you, or was it an easy process?
It wasn't a hard process. I think I asked around. I talked to Marty or someone, Dale maybe, and I think Dale suggested David. And it turns out that David was good friends with my mentor. I had no way of knowing that. And he also worked at a firm with a gal that used to be my mentor's assistant forever. And so there was just this nice triangle of common friends. And David's just such a sweet, kind, and decent man. When he tells me some of the stuff that he used to do, it's hard for me to believe that. But
Yeah.
but he had. I'm a difficult personality, shocker. But he had just enough iron and just enough velvet. He was, some of the old school guys can get really old school on you in terms of what you need to be doing and what comes out of your mouth. And it can be a lot of shut up and listen. And I think David was sensitive enough about that to where if he got too heavy handed, I'd have just shot him the Bronx salute and walked away. So he's been very patient and very appropriate with me.
That's great. And how was working through the steps for you?
It was hard. It still is hard. There's nothing easy about this.
In what ways?
The step 4, well, that's a beast. Maintaining your integrity. I mean, that's not easy.
Were you able to finish with that, with the 4th step?
Yeah, I need to start all over again. I guess we all do. But humility. You're talking to me. That's not easy for me.
Yeah.
And I've only sponsored one. I need to sponsor more because I need that. Right. So there's nothing easy about it. And I have a lot of runway left that I need to improve on. But it's anybody that says doing the 12 steps is easy, I don't believe them. Not if you're doing them right. It's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge the difficulties of working a good program. To make it sound too easy. I mean, first of all, the recovery centers are, it's almost enigmatic the way they handle things. They take somebody who's beaten almost to death, and they bring him into a 5-star hotel atmosphere with his every need and whim satisfied, and then they kick him out the back door, and the guy says, "What do I do now?" And there are a lot of people around who could probably use a little bit firmer hand, like the one you're talking about. But at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of embellishment, because I was around some of these guys who were the new timers, and it sounds great in a story to say, yeah, and old Brian used to, anytime I'd call him, he'd say, "Shut up and do the work," and he'd hang up on me. I'm thinking, how often does that actually happen? It sounds great in a story, and it might, but I don't know anybody who told me that their sponsor ever did that to them. And David, who I know quite well for a long time, he's not that kind of guy. No. And I think a guy like him is most effective with someone who may be otherwise difficult to somebody who claims to be a hard-ass sponsor.
Right. No, I think you're right. All I'm hearing about the old guys now, I have had several dinners with some of the guys in their 70s and their 80s that have been sober for 30 or 40 years, and they've got an edge to them, but they've all been kind at their core, 100%.
Well, that's because we know how important it is to help ourselves by helping others. One of the final things I want to ask you about, Dan, and we've been talking now for a little over an hour, and I wanted to get your perspective on the spiritual part of the program. The story you told about your wife at the time was in the hospital was powerful. What does your spiritual life look like these days?
It looks like it needs improvement, to be honest. I need to spend more time in prayer. I need to spend more time in thoughtful meditation. I need to spend more time thinking about what my higher power wants for me as opposed to what I want or what I think I need. I've come a long way, Howard, but I got a long way to go, Hoss. I'm still at my core a self-absorbed, entitled asshole, and that's not going to get cured in 3 or 4 years. It took me 65 years to create this asshole. It's going to take a few more to get rid of the worst parts of him.
Well, I happen to know somebody very well who wouldn't agree with you, and that's me. So I think the experience, strength, and hope that you can bring to any table that you're sitting across from a new man is extraordinary. And because you have been able to live the life that a lot of people feel or wish that they had been able to drink for many more years than they did and still make it into AA and still be able to stay sober. I drank for a total and used drugs for a total of 12 years, from 18 until I was a little over 30 before I stopped. I didn't know what to think about God. That always perplexed me. Is it okay to not think about God or not pray and do all these other things? Does that mean God won't help me if I don't do those things? I don't believe that would happen. So whenever you say you got a lot of work to do, there's always going to be as much in front of you as there is right now. I'm glad that you and I had a chance to sit down and talk some of this stuff through.
No, it's been my honor, Howard. You're really a credit to the program in so many ways, and this is just wonderful that you take the time and make the effort to do this. And the old trite, if my words help one person stay away for one day from alcohol, then I'll call it a win.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've got dozens and dozens of emails from people that are confirmation of that kind of win. People who, they hadn't been to a meeting, they couldn't get in touch with their sponsor, they were sitting alone, they didn't know what to do, and they popped in, the podcast, and they listened, and it's almost like reading a story in the back of the big book.
Right.
The only difference is it's audio, and it's facilitated as opposed to just somebody getting up there and telling you their story. And leaving 5 minutes at the end to say, well, and then I stopped drinking and everything was great from that point forward. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, you've been sober like 30 years. What happened in those 30 years that was meaningful? Right. And it sounds to me like you had some of those experiences during the years that you were still drinking that weren't inhibited by your drinking. And so I wonder whether you kind of feel that way or whether you're able to reconcile the fact that you drank for a long time, feeling like and absolutely sure that it was functional.
I don't know. I don't really dwell on that very much. I'm trying to focus on getting better and doing what I need to. I've been told before that my rear view mirror is broken. That God didn't give me one. There may be some truth to that.
Maybe hanging outside the door,
Yeah.
That's something. Well, I want to thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to say that that at this point you think might be helpful, or have we kind of wrapped everything up?
Two things. One, if you have any thought, and I'm talking to the beginners or the folks that haven't started, if you have any thought about going to a meeting, meaning if you have any thought about whether or not you're an alcoholic, go to a meeting. I mean, the worst that can happen is you don't like it and you walk away. The second is, and this is paraphrase something I heard Lance Armstrong, and I know he's a divisive human and all that, but I was listening to one of his podcasts, and Lance, although he doesn't like to identify as sober now, at least per his podcast, he is, but he didn't want to be known, quote, as that AA guy. Again, I'm just listening to his podcast. But Lance said, I haven't met one person that quit drinking that regretted the decision to stop drinking. Right. And that's really powerful.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad is going to come from you stopping drinking. Nothing,
That's true. And it's the sort of thing that when you stop and take stock of everything that you've been able to win back through hard work, the relationships, the professional standing, not to mention your ability and willingness to help others. I mean, that's a big get for 3 years of sobriety.
And this is just sheer vanity, but let me throw it out there for the people that are thinking about, I've lost 90 pounds, right? I mean, yeah. I'm a third, and it's been a huge physical, psychological, mental, my acuity, tenacity, preparation, night and day. same.
Yeah.
I don't even look like the same. I'm not the same person. And all of that is because I'm in AA and I made the decision not to drink and to work the steps,
Yeah,
all of it.
yeah, that's great. Something opened you up to the possibilities of doing something about your weight.
That's right.
And my guess is that if you continue to apply the same effort towards that, and I know a lot of people these days are using all sorts of things to drop the weight, but the issue always is, will you gain it all back? And to stay on the winning side of that, you really do have to have that daily reprieve and the daily knowledge and wisdom to put down the fork or whatever it is. And I admire and honor you for that, and think that what we've done here today will be of value, because it will be going out over all the standard podcast apps. It'll be available at my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com. As soon as it is ready, I'll let you know, probably a couple weeks. But I usually release one episode every Wednesday, and so it'll be coming before too long, and I'll let you know when that happens.
Great. It's an honor to be on the show, Howard. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you, Dan, and I appreciate it. And I'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.
Likewise. Thank you, my friend.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Visit my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.